The concrete was still warm from the afternoon sun when Dominique Vasquez's boots hit the yard with the rhythm of a death march, each step echoing off the high walls of Rosewood Correctional Facility for women like a countdown to violence. 57 inmates stopped what they were doing. Basketball games froze mid-dribble, card games hung suspended, conversations died mid-sentence. Because when Dom moved with purpose, smart women got out of the way and smarter women paid attention to who she was targeting. Today, all eyes tracked toward the small figure in soft pink standing alone near the rusted hoop at the far end of the yard, hands loose at her sides, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, face calm as a mountain lake before a storm. Maya Chin had been inside for 72 hours and had already broken the first rule of survival. She hadn't bent the knee to anyone. In a place where hierarchy meant everything, where the weak attached themselves to the strong or got crushed underfoot, her silence was suicide. The pink uniform she wore was supposed to mark her as fresh meat, vulnerable and ripe for exploitation. But on her slight frame it looked less like a target and more like a flag of defiance. She was small, maybe 5'4", with features that suggested East Asian heritage and eyes that watched the approaching storm with the kind of calm that came from either profound stupidity or profound confidence. The other inmates, pressed against the fence and walls now, forming an involuntary coliseum, couldn't tell which. Dom was a mountain in human form, 6 feet of muscle and scar tissue and prison tattoos that mapped out 3 years of unchallenged dominance. Her arms were thick enough to snap bone, her fists scarred from breaking faces, her reputation built on 4 hospitalizations in her first month alone. She controlled everything that mattered inside these walls. The cigarette trade, the protection rackets, the contraband flow that separated barely tolerable existence from pure misery. 3 women walked behind her in a wedge formation. Razor, wiry and vicious with a shank scar running down her left forearm. Mags, a former college athlete gone soft around the edges but still dangerous. And Sienna, newer to Dom's crew but eager to prove herself. Together they were an unstoppable force, and they were bearing down on the girl in pink like a tsunami approaching an island. The air tasted like rust and sweat and anticipation. Guard Hernandez, 20 years in the system and tired down to her bones, spoke quietly into her radio from her post near the southeast tower. "We got something developing, Dom's making a move on the new fish." But the response crackled back with the familiar refrain. "Let it play out, let the hierarchy establish itself naturally, intervene only if weapons appear." Hernandez didn't like it, but she'd learned long ago that some lessons couldn't be prevented, only survived, and she shifted her weight and kept her hand near her baton and watched. "You think you can run this place?" Dom's voice cut across the yard, theatrical and contemptuous, pitched to carry to every corner because this wasn't just about the new girl, it was about reminding everyone else what happened when you forgot your place. She stopped 10 feet away, her crew spreading out to cut off escape routes, and the circle of watching inmates tightened. "Last chance, princess. Get on your knees, kiss my boot, maybe I only break one arm." Maya turned slowly, economically, no wasted movement, and met Dom's eyes with a stare that was neither aggressive nor submissive but simply observational, analytical, like she was studying something mildly interesting under glass. This more than anything infuriated Dom because fear was respect in this place and without fear control crumbled. Maya's weight shifted almost imperceptibly, her center dropping maybe an inch, her feet angling into a stance so subtle that none of the watching women recognized it, but her body knew what was coming and was preparing channels for energy to flow through when the violence arrived. Dom lunged first and the crowd gasped because they'd seen this before, that massive right fist arcing through the air like a wrecking ball aimed at the new girl's face, a blow that had shattered cheekbones and orbital sockets, that carried behind it all of Dom's weight and reputation and 3 years of unchallenged brutality. Maya's head tilted 3 inches left, her torso rotating, and the fist crashed through empty air so close it stirred her ponytail, and before Dom could recover from the overextension Maya's body flowed like water finding cracks in stone. Her left hand rose in a blur, fingers rigid, striking with surgical precision into the cluster of nerves just below Dom's right ribcage, a target most fighters didn't even know existed. The impact looked minimal, no wild haymaker or dramatic punch, but the effect was immediate and devastating. Dom's breath exploded from her lungs in a shocked gasp, her body betrayed by its own nervous system, stumbling sideways as her right side stopped responding correctly. The nerve strike had temporarily severed communication between brain and muscle, leaving her weak and exposed, and Maya pressed the advantage with cold efficiency. She stepped inside Dom's guard, her movements a practiced kata executed at combat speed, her right elbow rising sharply to catch Dom's jaw with a crack that echoed across the suddenly silent yard. Dom's head snapped back, her body propelled by momentum and pain, and she crashed into the brick wall behind her with a thud that seemed to shake the foundation itself. The circle erupted in gasps and murmurs that spread like ripples in a pond. Razor stood frozen for a half second, her mind struggling to process what her eyes had witnessed because Dom didn't lose. Dom was an unstoppable force. Yet there she was slumped against the wall with blood trickling from her split lip and her eyes wide with shock and dawning fear. Get her. Razor screamed, charging forward with Mags close behind, Sienna hesitating but the crowd's pressure pushing her forward too. Maya's eyes tracked all three simultaneously, her peripheral vision calculating angles and timing with the precision of someone who'd spent years training for exactly this kind of chaos. Razor came in fast and sloppy, leading with a wild right hook powered by rage rather than technique, and Maya dropped low, impossibly low, her back leg sweeping out in a perfectly executed ashy barai that caught Razor at the ankles. Razor's feet flew out from under her and gravity did the rest, her body slamming into the concrete hard enough that the back of her skull bounced once before she went still, consciousness flickering away like a candle in wind. Mags tried to use her size advantage, coming in for a bear hug, thinking to pin Maya's arms and crush her with 60 pounds of muscle. But Maya's wrist flicked in a small circular motion and suddenly Mags was off balance, her own momentum betraying her. Maya pivoted, adding her hip as a fulcrum, and Mags found herself airborne, spinning, the world tilting crazily before the concrete rushed up to meet her. She landed hard on her side, the wind knocked completely from her lungs, gasping like a fish drowning in air. Sienna skidded to a halt, hands raised in surrender. I'm out, she stammered, backing away rapidly, survival instinct winning decisively over loyalty. The entire exchange had taken maybe 10 seconds. 3 women down, 1 surrendered, and Maya Chin stood in the center of the carnage with her pink uniform still spotless, her breathing barely elevated, her expression unchanged like she'd just completed a light warm-up rather than dismantled 4 of the most feared women in Rosewood. Dom pushed herself off the wall with a roar of pure animal fury, rage overriding pain and common sense because this wasn't about dominance anymore, it was about survival, about the fundamental understanding that if she didn't destroy this woman everything she'd built would crumble into dust. She charged like a bull, head down, arms wide, trying to tackle Maya through sheer mass and momentum, betting everything on one final devastating collision. Maya waited, perfectly still, a statue in pink until Dom was 3 feet away and then she moved. She stepped forward into the charge rather than away from it, a choice that seemed suicidal until you understood the geometry of force and leverage, her left foot planting, her right leg rising in a textbook Majeri front kick executed with the precision of someone who'd practiced the movement 10,000 times. Her heel connected with Dom's solar plexus at the exact moment when Dom's forward momentum was greatest, creating a collision of opposing forces that defied the size difference between them. Dom stopped as if she'd hit an invisible wall. Her eyes bulged, her mouth opened in a silent scream, and she folded around the impact point like a closing book. Maya withdrew her foot and Dom collapsed to her knees then forward onto her hands, gasping desperately for air that wouldn't come, her body locked in spasm, diaphragm frozen, lungs unable to expand. Maya stood over her, not gloating, not celebrating, just waiting to see if the fight would continue, and around them the yard had gone completely silent. 57 women stood transfixed, watching the impossible made manifest. Even the guards seemed frozen, their hands on their radios but making no move to intervene because this was beyond a typical prison fight. This was a masterclass in combat, a demonstration of skill so far beyond normal violence that it transcended into something almost beautiful in its terrible efficiency. The hierarchy that had governed Rosewood for 3 years had just been demolished in under a minute by a small woman in a pink uniform who looked like she could teach a yoga class immediately afterward. Guard Hernandez found her voice first. Chin, step back. Hands where I can see them. She moved forward cautiously, other guards finally mobilizing, creating a barrier between Maya and the downed women. Maya raised her hands slowly, palms open, showing no weapons, no threat. I was defending myself, officer, she said calmly, her voice soft, almost gentle, with faint traces of an accent she'd mostly trained away. They attacked me. I responded appropriately. Appropriately. The word hung in the air, almost absurd given the carnage. Hernandez looked at the scene, at Maya's clean uniform and relaxed posture, at Dom still gasping on the ground, at Razor unconscious, at Mags curled fetal. The story was clear enough and every camera in the yard would show exactly what Maya had said. She'd been attacked and she defended herself with devastating efficiency. Medical to the yard, Hernandez spoke into her radio. Multiple injuries, level 2. And get Warden Blackwell. She needs to see this. As other guards secured the injured women, Maya felt the weight of 57 pairs of eyes on her, and she scanned the crowd, reading the shift in their expressions. Fear, yes, but also something else. Respect, calculation, recognition that power had just changed hands. An older woman, someone who moved through the yard with the quiet authority of a long-timer who'd earned her place through wisdom rather than violence, caught Maya's eye and gave a slight nod. Acknowledgement of something profound. Near the basketball hoop, younger inmates whispered urgently, "Did you see that kick? Where'd she learn that? Dom's gonna kill her once she recovers." But the last statement lacked conviction because they'd seen what happened to Dom, and myths of invincibility didn't survive being demolished in public. In the guard tower, Warden Elizabeth Blackwell watched the security footage replay for the third time, her coffee growing cold and forgotten in her hand. 23 years running correctional facilities, she'd seen every variation of prison violence, every type of inmate, but this was different. The new arrival, Chin, moved with the trained precision of special operations, the tactical awareness of military or law enforcement, yet her file showed nothing like that. Arrested for assault and self-defense, court-appointed lawyer, minimal record before the incident. Something didn't add up. Pull her full file, Blackwell ordered her assistant. Federal records too. I want to know who we really have in our facility. Down in the yard, medical personnel loaded Dom onto a stretcher. She'd regained her breath but couldn't stand, her body still shaking from trauma. As they wheeled her past Maya, their eyes met. Dom's were filled with hatred, humiliation, and beneath it all, fear. Maya's eyes reflected nothing back, just that same calm analytical stare. "This isn't over," Dom rasped. Maya didn't respond because they both knew the truth. It was over, and the old order had fallen, and what came next was still to be written. As Maya was escorted back toward the cell blocks, not arrested, not punished, just removed from the situation, inmates parted to let her pass. Some pressed against walls, giving her wide berth. Others watched with calculating eyes, already thinking about angles, alliances, opportunities in the power vacuum she'd created. The whispers started immediately and spread through D Block like wildfire, then C Block, carried by the mysterious communication network that existed in every prison. By lights out, Maya Chen's story had been embellished and exaggerated until she'd supposedly fought off a dozen attackers without breaking a sweat, studied with ancient masters in hidden monasteries, was some kind of secret agent or assassin doing time undercover. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more complicated. Maya had started training in traditional martial arts at age 6, pushed by immigrant parents who wanted their daughter to have discipline and confidence. By her teens she'd branched into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and boxing. By her 20s she'd earned black belts in multiple disciplines and competed at national levels. When 5 men had cornered her in a parking garage thinking her an easy target, her body had reacted with trained reflexes. She put all 5 in the hospital and found herself facing assault charges despite clear evidence of self-defense. Her court-appointed lawyer had been overworked and underskilled, and the plea deal had seemed like the best option at the time. Now, in this concrete cage, those years of training had made her something she'd never wanted to be, a symbol, a legend, a challenge. In her cell that night, Maya sat on her thin mattress, back against cold concrete wall, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She'd hoped to serve her 18-month sentence quietly, to fade into the background and emerge without complications, but she'd forgotten the fundamental rule of places like this. Showing weakness was more dangerous than showing strength. By standing up to Dom, by refusing to submit, she'd probably saved herself months or years of predation, but she'd also painted a target on her back that wouldn't fade easily. 3 cells down she could hear younger inmates whispering, "You think she'd teach us? Man, if I could fight like that. Dom's gonna send someone after her for sure." Yeah, but who's gonna take that job after what they saw today? The whispers carried through the block, mixing with the usual sounds of prison at night. Toilets flushing, women crying quietly, guards making rounds, the hum of fluorescent lights that never quite went dark. Maya closed her eyes and listened to the ecosystem she'd disrupted, feeling the ripples of consequence spreading outward from the epicenter of violence in the yard. The pink uniform lay folded on her bunk and she ran her fingers over the soft fabric. Tomorrow it would be replaced with standard gray. Her first week would be over, the marking period ended, but Maya suspected the attention wouldn't fade so easily. She'd rewritten the rules of Rosewood Correctional and in doing so had set in motion forces she couldn't fully control. Outside her cell, footsteps approached with a familiar gait and Maya tensed then relaxed. Guard Hernandez doing late rounds. "Chin." Hernandez's voice came through the bars, low and serious. "You made quite an impression today. Warden wants to see you tomorrow morning. Maya nodded acknowledgement. Hernandez paused, wrestling with something. Look, whatever training you have, whoever you were before you came here, that was impressive. But it's also dangerous. For you and for everyone else. This place has an ecosystem. You just disrupted it. There'll be consequences. I know, Maya said simply, and after Hernandez left she lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, at the water stains and cracks that mapped their own stories of time and decay. 18 months stretched ahead like an eternity. She'd survived day 4. Only 536 days remained. Somewhere in the darkness of D-Block, Dom Vasquez lay in the infirmary plotting revenge with a mind that knew only one language, and that was violence. Somewhere else, younger inmates discussed alliances and possibilities, their worldviews fundamentally shifted by what they'd witnessed. In the administrative wing, Warden Blackwell reviewed files and made decisions that would ripple through the facility like shockwaves from an earthquake. And in every cell, women who'd witnessed the fight in the yard adjusted their mental maps of power and survival, recalculating hierarchies and allegiances and understanding that nothing would be the same. The morning would bring new challenges, new confrontations, new tests of the boundaries Maya had established. The warden's interview would be delicate navigation between truth and self-preservation. Dom's crew would be regrouping, planning retaliation, trying to salvage what remained of their shattered reputation. Other inmates would be approaching with requests or challenges or offerings of alliance, each one a potential trap or opportunity. The guards would be watching more closely now, suspicious of anyone who moved like Maya moved, who possessed skills that didn't match their official files. But for now, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn when the prison settled into uneasy sleep, Maya Chen allowed herself to rest. She'd done what she needed to do, established boundaries, demonstrated capability, claimed her right to exist without submission. In a place designed to break spirits and crush independence, where pink uniforms marked the vulnerable and concrete walls contained the desperate, she'd proven something fundamental. Skill and discipline could still matter. Technique could triumph over brutality. And sometimes the smallest person in the yard could be the most dangerous. The rules of Rosewood had been rewritten in blood and broken bone and nerve strikes that few people understood. The hierarchy that had governed through fear and violence had been exposed as fragile, dependent on the illusion of invincibility that Maya had shattered with surgical precision. Tomorrow would reveal whether she'd bought herself safety or simply ensured a more sophisticated level of warfare, whether she'd be left alone or become the ultimate prize for anyone ambitious enough to challenge her. The pink uniform that had marked her as prey had become something else entirely, a symbol of the day everything changed, the day a quiet woman in soft fabric had walked into the yard and walked out having demolished 3 years of established order. Outside her cell window, through bars that divided the night sky into geometric sections, Maya could see a sliver of moon hanging above the prison walls. It was the same moon that shone on the world beyond these concrete barriers, on the life she'd left behind and the future she'd return to eventually if she survived. 18 months. 536 days. Each one would be a negotiation between the woman she'd been, the woman she'd become in that parking garage defending her life, and the woman these walls were trying to make her into. Each day would require the same calculated control she'd shown in the yard, knowing when to strike and when to wait, when to demonstrate power and when to fade into the background. She thought about the look in Dom's eyes as the stretcher had wheeled past, that mixture of hatred and fear and humiliation that burned hotter than simple anger. That look promised future violence, future attempts to reclaim lost status, future nights when Maya would need to sleep with one eye open and her body ready to move at the first sound of trouble. She thought about the younger inmates whispering about learning from her, about the responsibility that came with being seen as powerful, about how quickly respect could turn into resentment if she wasn't careful. She thought about the warden's suspicious interest, about files being pulled and questions being asked and the possibility that her carefully managed anonymity was about to be stripped away. But mostly she thought about the 18 months ahead and the decision she'd made in that split second when Dom had demanded submission, to fight rather than fold, to risk everything on the belief that her skills would be enough. That decision had consequences radiating outward like cracks in ice, unpredictable and irreversible. The ecosystem Hernandez had mentioned was destabilized now and nature abhorred a vacuum. Someone would try to fill the power void Dom had left. Maybe multiple someones. Maybe they'd come at her one at a time, or maybe they'd learn from Dom's mistake and come all at once. Maybe they'd use weapons or manipulation or some combination of tactics she hadn't anticipated. Maya rolled onto her side, feeling the thin mattress do nothing to cushion concrete beneath, and pulled the scratchy blanket up to her shoulder. The prison was never truly quiet, always the sound of someone crying or arguing or pacing or simply breathing in the darkness, but she'd learned to filter it out, to find islands of stillness within the chaos. Tomorrow the pink uniform would go and the gray would come and she'd meet the warden and navigate whatever came next. But tonight she existed in the aftermath, in the space between one version of prison life and whatever was being born from the violence in the yard. The balance of power at Rosewood Correctional Facility for Women had shifted on its axis and settled into a new configuration with Maya Chen at its center, whether she wanted that position or not. The small woman who'd hoped to fade into the background had instead become the most visible person in the facility, her name already becoming legend, her story already being told and retold with increasing embellishment. She'd survived the first test, but in surviving had created a dozen new challenges, each one potentially more dangerous than Dom's straightforward brutality. The guards would watch her differently now. The inmates would approach her differently. The administrators would process her differently. Everything had changed in the span of a single minute of perfectly executed violence. And somewhere in the night, in cells scattered throughout the facility, 57 women processed what they'd witnessed and made their own calculations about what it meant and how they'd respond. Some would seek to align themselves with the new power. Some would test it to see if it was real or lucky. Some would fear it and give her wide berth. Some would resent it and plot against it. But none of them would forget it, and that was the burden Maya now carried. The weight of being unforgettable in a place where anonymity was often the only real protection. The moon moved slowly across the sky beyond her barred window, marking time in a place where time moved differently, where days blurred together into an endless present tense punctuated only by meals and counts and occasional explosions of violence. Maya's breathing slowed and deepened as sleep finally approached, her body's need overriding her mind's insistence on vigilance, and in that liminal space between waking and dreaming she felt the full weight of what she'd done and what was coming. The prison would never let her fade into the background now. She'd shown her cards and revealed her value and made herself simultaneously too dangerous to challenge carelessly and too valuable to leave alone. The rules had been rewritten and the game had changed, and Rosewood Correctional would never be quite the same. And as Maya Chen drifted into uneasy sleep on her fourth night inside, the consequences of one moment of violence in the afternoon sun were still spreading outward through the facility like ripples that would eventually touch every corner of every block, changing everything in ways both subtle and profound, and the only certainty was that the morning would bring new challenges that would test whether her skills were enough to navigate the world she'd created when she'd refused to kneel in the yard and had instead demolished the queen and rewritten the hierarchy and proven that sometimes the smallest person wearing the softest color could be the most dangerous force behind these walls.